A road, a figure, a sword already drawn, not sheathed, not at rest, drawn as if whatever was coming next had already been decided. Joshua was not the kind of man who startled easily. He had been born into slavery. He had commanded armies. He had stood in front of a generation of his own people who wanted to stone him rather than believe what he had seen with his own eyes. He stopped anyway, because there are moments when the body understands something the mind has not caught up with yet, and this was one of them. He asked the only question that made sense. Are you on our side or on theirs? The figure did not say, yours. He said, I am the commander of Jehovah's army. Now I have come. Not an ally, not a reinforcement, not an answer to the question Joshua had asked, something that corrected the question at its root. Joshua fell with his face to the ground. He removed his sandals. He had heard of a man who had done this once before, at a burning bush, in another desert, at the beginning of another impossible story. His name was Joshua, and he was about to understand why his name meant what it did. He was born a slave. The Bible gives us almost nothing about those years. No dramatic childhood moment, no early sign of greatness, no divine appearance at the beginning of his life to mark him as chosen, just the silence of Egypt and the silence of a record that simply does not speak about what he endured or who he was before the Exodus changed everything. That silence is the first thing worth noticing about Joshua. Most of the Bible's great figures get an origin. He gets a footnote, son of Nun, of the tribe of Ephraim. What he was built into, no one recorded. What he became, everyone remembers. The first time the record places him at center is at Rephidim, shortly after the Exodus, when the Amalekites attacked without provocation. Moses gave the order. Joshua would lead the army. No prior military experience documented. No training program mentioned. Just you, go, fight. Moses stood on the hill above the battle. When his arms were raised, Israel prevailed. When they fell, Amalek prevailed. Joshua fought in the valley, while Moses determined the outcome on the hill. He won the battle. Moses held the record. That was the structure of Joshua's world, established in his very first appearance. He was the instrument. Someone else was the story. Later, at Mount Sinai, Joshua accompanied Moses partway up the mountain. Then he stopped. Moses went on into the cloud. Joshua waited 40 days, 40 nights. When they came back down, Joshua heard the sound of the people and told Moses it sounded like battle. It was not battle. It was celebration. Israel, dancing around a golden calf. This small detail reveals something about how Joshua's mind worked. In stillness, he was already prepared for a fight. In silence, he was already waiting for a signal. He was the kind of man who, even at rest, was answering an alarm no one else could hear. There was an incident, quieter, easier to overlook, when two men named Eldad and Medad began prophesying in the camp. Joshua went directly to Moses. "Restrain them," he said. He was feeling jealous, not for Jehovah's honor, but for his Lord's. Moses corrected him gently. "Are you feeling jealous for my sake?" The correction was kind. It was also precise. Joshua had spent so long in the presence of one man that devotion to that man and devotion to Jehovah had begun to feel like the same thing. He didn't yet know how to separate them. The 12 spies went into Canaan. They came back with grapes and fear. 10 men said, "The cities are fortified. The people are giants. We cannot do this." Joshua and Caleb tore their garments. They had seen the same land, the same walled cities, the same giants, and they reported something different, not because they had less information, but because they were counting on something the 10 were not. The assembly responded by talking about stoning them. Think about what it takes to say something true in a room full of people who do not want to hear it. Tell me in the comments, has there been a moment in your life when you stood with the minority because you believed Jehovah's side of the calculation? The nation chose fear. 40 years in the wilderness. The entire generation that refused to enter would finish their lives between the promise and the fulfillment, watching the land from the wrong side of an uncrossable distance. Joshua and Caleb survived it. They watched, they waited. When the last of that generation was gone, Moses gathered all of Israel and named Joshua as his successor, in front of everyone, the one who would bring them into the land Moses had led them toward for 4 decades. Moses told Joshua, "Be courageous and strong." Then Jehovah said the same. Then, after Moses died and the mourning ended, the army said it too. 3 times, the same command, from 3 different directions, before a single step had been taken into Canaan. Why does a man who has waited 40 years, who has seen everything Joshua had seen, still need to be told to be courageous? Because courage is not the absence of the weight you carry. It is what you choose to do while carrying it. Moses died on the top of Mount Nebo. Israel mourned 30 days. Then Jehovah spoke, directly, immediately, without ceremony, and said, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now get up, cross the Jordan. I will be with you, just as I was with Moses. I will not desert you or abandon you." 3 words had closed a world. The rest was an opening. The Jordan was flooding. Spring, the worst time to cross a river with an army and a nation. Joshua sent the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant ahead. The moment their feet touched the water, the river stopped flowing. The entire nation crossed on dry ground. He built a memorial at Gilgal from 12 stones pulled out of the riverbed, not to mark what Joshua had done, to ensure that every future generation would ask, "What do these stones mean?" And the answer would always point somewhere else. That was how he built, away from himself. At Gilgal, every male born in the wilderness was circumcised. An entire army, incapacitated by covenant, 3 days into enemy territory. No military commander would have chosen this moment. Joshua did it because Jehovah said to. The risk was absolute. The obedience was the point. The first Passover in Canaan, and then, the morning after, the manna that had appeared every single day for 40 years simply did not appear. The land produced food. The miracle that had defined the entire wilderness era ended, because a better provision had arrived. Joshua had to lead people into a world where the thing they had always relied on was gone, replaced by something that required them to work the ground themselves. Then the road to Jericho, and the man with the drawn sword. Are you on our side or on theirs? I am the commander of Jehovah's army. Now I have come. Think about what Joshua was carrying at that moment. 40 years of waiting. A name, Moses, that the nation had not stopped saying. A commission delivered publicly, including the part about what he would not receive. An army that had followed him into Canaan, still mourning the man he was appointed to replace. The stranger's answer dissolved all of it at once. There was a commander in this campaign, and it was not Joshua. He fell with his face to the ground. He removed his sandals. The same posture, the same holy ground. the same gesture Moses had made at the burning bush, when the burning bush was the beginning of Moses' story. This was the beginning of Joshua's. He had not been asked to be Moses. He had never been asked to be Moses. He had been asked to be Joshua, the one through whom Jehovah would bring salvation to an entire people. His name had carried that meaning from the day Moses gave it to him. He had just needed someone to say it with a sword. Jericho fell. 7 days of silence, 6 days of walking, no commands, no battle cries, no weapons raised. On the 7th day, 7 circuits, 7 trumpets, 1 shout. Walls that had stood for generations came down in the time it takes for sound to stop traveling. Rahab and her household were brought out, the scarlet cord in the window, the promise honored. The city was devoted to destruction, 30 kings still ahead. The work had barely begun, but the man walking toward that work was different now. He knew who the commander was. Not everything went cleanly. A smaller city, far less formidable than Jericho, turned Israel back. 36 men died in a rout that should not have happened. Joshua fell before the ark of Jehovah and tore his garments. Jehovah told him, "Get up. The problem is not the battle, the problem is inside the camp." Achan had taken devoted things from Jericho, a beautiful garment, silver, gold, and hidden them under his tent. One man's concealed transgression had cost 36 people their lives. Joshua stood up and dealt with what was actually there. Is there something you have been carrying that you know needs to be brought into the open? Tell me in the comments, or just sit with that question for a moment. Jehovah's instruction to Joshua was not a rebuke. It was a direction. Get up and look at what is actually happening. Then came the Gibeonites. Men arrived at the camp in worn clothing, carrying dry bread, claiming to be ambassadors from a distant nation. Their sandals were cracked. Their wineskins were patched. Every detail suggested a long journey. All of it was staged. Joshua examined them. The chieftains examined them. They consulted the provisions. They did not consult Jehovah. A covenant of peace was made. 3 days later, these men lived in the next territory. Not distant travelers, neighbors who had manufactured their own safety through deception. The treaty stood. Joshua would not break a word given in Jehovah's name, even a word obtained by fraud. The Gibeonites became woodcutters and water carriers in Israel. Their punishment, their protection, and their permanent position, all bound by a covenant they had engineered themselves. Then 5 kings attacked Gibeon. The Gibeonites sent word to Joshua, "Do not abandon your servants. Come quickly and save us." Jehovah said, "Go, I have handed them over to you." Joshua marched through the night, and in the middle of that battle he spoke to Jehovah, and Jehovah listened to Joshua's voice. The sun stood still over Gibeon, the moon over the valley of Ajalon. The battle continued until it was finished, until every enemy had been accounted for. There has never been a day like it, before or since, a day when Jehovah listened to the voice of a man that way. And it happened because a deceiver needed protecting, and Joshua had given his word. Jehovah does not waste a committed word, not even one given under false pretenses. 31 kings, southern campaign, northern campaign, the Anakim, the giants that had terrified 10 of the 12 spies 40 years earlier, driven from the hill country. The land had rest from war. Joshua was old. He gathered the leaders of Israel, the elders, the judges, the officers, and he spoke to them not as a commander reviewing his record, but as a witness. He said, You have seen everything Jehovah your God has done to all these nations. He fought for you. He said, not one word out of all the good promises that Jehovah your God made concerning you has failed. Every single one has come true. Then he distributed the land, tribe by tribe, family by family. He oversaw every inheritance, every border, every city of refuge. He took his portion last, Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, a city he chose himself, the final inheritance distributed. He built it. He lived there. He waited for everyone else before he took anything for himself. The man who had spent 40 years behind Moses had spent another 20 years putting everyone else ahead of him. The assembly at Shechem, all the tribes, all the elders. Joshua stood before all of Israel and recited the entire history, from Abraham called out of Mesopotamia, through the patriarchs, through Egypt, through the wilderness, through every battle of the conquest, not as a man reviewing what he had accomplished, but as a man presenting evidence, evidence that Jehovah keeps what he says. Then he gave them a choice. Serve the gods your ancestors served, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live. But as for me and my household, we shall serve Jehovah. He did not say, I led this nation, I won these battles, I finished what Moses could not. He said, we will serve. After everything, after the slave years with no record, after 40 years as attendant, after 40 years of wilderness, after 6 years of war, after the Gibeonites, after the long day, after 31 kings, after distributing all the land, what defined him was not what he had done. It was who he served. Israel served Jehovah all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived him, the ones who had seen everything Jehovah had done. His faithfulness had a reach that extended past his own life. He died at 110 years old in Timnath-Serah, in the land he had entered on dry ground and crossed on holy feet. It was enough. This is where your story meets Joshua's. Not at the Jordan, not at Jericho, in the long season before anything happened. In the years when you were clearly being prepared for something, and that something had not arrived yet. Maybe you are living in someone else's shadow right now, measuring your own steps against a person whose footsteps feel too large to follow, wondering if there will ever be a moment that is unmistakably yours. Maybe you have made a commitment that cost you more than you anticipated, and you are honoring it anyway because your word is your word, even when no one would fault you for walking away. Maybe you are in a season of silence before your own commission, and the silence feels less like preparation and more like being overlooked. Every time you stay faithful in the years that no one is watching, you are being like Joshua. Every time you honor a commitment, even when keeping it is harder than breaking it, you are being like Joshua. Every time you stand in a room full of fear and say what you actually believe, you are being like Joshua. Every time you let the commander lead and follow without needing to be the one the story is about, you are being like Joshua. And Jehovah knows that. Jehovah sees your effort. He sees the years before the Jordan. He sees the morning you got up and kept serving when the provision you had always depended on was no longer there. He sees every step you took in a direction that made no sense to anyone but him, without anyone recording it, without anyone naming what it cost you, without anyone understanding how long you had already been preparing. Keep going, because the land Jehovah has promised does not stop being promised because the crossing has taken longer than you expected. And when you look at Joshua's life, here is the question worth sitting with. If someone had spent years watching how you followed Jehovah, would they say you had followed him wholly? If something in this story stayed with you, share it with one person who is in a season of waiting. They may need to hear that Jehovah does not forget the ones who are still preparing.
If you enjoyed this content, subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring Bible story.